Let's talk women and empowerment in Africa. To talk about this with us, we have someone who's a women's rights advocate, policy expert, and politician. She's a Rwandan member of the East African Legislative Assembly, 7 for the second term, and she is Fatuma Ndagiza. She joins us this morning virtually from Tanzania. Good morning. Welcome to Ad Exchange.
How are you?
I'm well, and thank you for being a part of the show. You've done so much trying to push for women's rights, and many of the women like you have done their bit in ensuring that women have rights to education, have economic opportunities, and even political opportunities. But there is still much that women want to do. What can you say about what has been done so far and how women can get to the next level?
Yes, thank you so much for having me on the show. Women in Africa, I would say, are the backbone of the economies of Africa. They constitute over 50% of the population. They are mothers, housewives, they care for families, they are community builders, they are peace builders when conflicts break. They cater for their homes, they cater for their communities, and I would say they are also great contributors to national development. A lot has been done in Africa for the last decades, especially after the Beijing Platform for Action, but more needs to be done in the area of decision making. Although Africa has made strides, and most of our parliaments in Africa are now close between 22% to 30%. Some, like Rwanda, has even gone to 61%. In the area of executive leadership, again, you have women, the number of women rising. At the local governance level, you also have women leaders. In the area of the economy, out of the 90% SMEs in Africa, at least a third are women. But despite all this progress that have been made by women, there are still challenges. Women are still constrained by the cultural traditions. In some parts of Africa, women cannot inherit property and land. They are still unemployed. They still face discrimination. So there are still challenges, but I would say that women are the pillars of development in our countries, and it's a call to action, especially as we're about to conclude the Women's Month with the theme, Invest in Women and Accelerating Progress. It's a call to governments of Africa. It's a call to different levels of leadership to ensure that women are at the center of development in Africa.
All right, glad to have you join us once again. It's a special month for women, and the theme for this year's celebration is Invest in Women, Accelerate Progress. But I would like to find out from you, when we talk about investment in women, I would like you to expatiate on this. What kind of investment should we talk about? And then why do you think is more necessary, more than ever, to bring up this advocacy of investment in women at a crucial time like this?
Yeah, invest in women means a lot. It is a broad concept. We need to invest in women's education because up to now, when it comes to illiteracy, we still have many women who cannot read and write. We need women to be skilled in technologies because today we know we're already in the information and digital technologies, and if you're talking about doing business, you need at least to have the basics in technology. We need to ensure that women have access and control over resources, including land. access to credit. We need to ensure that we even increase on the budgets, make sure that the budgets that we spend are gender responsive. We talk about agriculture. We still have many women in agriculture sector, and most of them are still using subsistence. They are still subsistence farmers using the hoe. They need to have tractors. They need to have access to fertilizers. They need to have access to modern farming. We talk about health. We still have women dying, giving birth to children. We need to ensure that we improve on health care facilities to women. Should have access to insurance. They should have access to health facilities from the time they conceive up to the time they give birth. We still have challenges where women are still fetching water using the bucket, and in very far places, we need to ensure that water facilities are closer to women. So really the word investment is broad, because as we speak about women, they are undertaking multiple roles. And therefore, we need to ensure that at practical level need, they have access to basic facilities to be able to reduce on the workload. But at the same time, they need to have access to technology. They need to have access to skilled education. And here we also have to talk about girls to make sure that they attend schools. But more to that, we need to have women at decision-making table, so that decisions affecting their lives, they should have a stake in that.
Talking about women having a say in decisions that affect their lives, you helped to create the National Women's Council and its regional and local framework to enable women, in order to empower them to achieve political and economic parity. Now, when it comes to the political scene, in Africa, Rwanda has the highest number of women representation. What has helped in making that possible for Rwanda, and what can other African countries learn from that?
In Rwanda, the number one thing that was done was creating, enabling legal and policy framework to ensure that you have more women in decision making. So it implies that there were some discriminatory laws that were denying women to participate in leadership, but also in the aspect of economy. And most of these laws have been reviewed to ensure that we have gender-sensitive laws. But also, in 2003, women, first of all, had been organized into what is called the National Women Council, from the grassroots to the national level, so that they can improve on their confidence, on their self-esteem, so that they can elect their leaders, so that they can be groomed into leadership. And in 2003, we had to make sure that women's rights, women's agenda in decision-making, including quotas, were enshrined in the 2003 Constitution, where at least a minimum of 30% of all positions of leadership and decision-making had to be occupied by women. But in addition to that, we also ensured that in the fundamental principles of the Constitution, the issue of gender parity was also enshrined in the Constitution. And that's why in 2003, when the first elections took place, after the transition process, we had close to 48% of women. And as we speak now, it is 61%. But of course, a lot has also been done in terms of building institutions, the gender machineries. We have the Ministry of Gender that spearheads gender policies and also monitors the implementation. But we also have another institution that is also embedded in our Constitution called the Gender Monitoring Office, whose role is to monitor whether every institution of government, even the private sector, in their decision-making positions, there is a minimum of 30% representation, and even political parties. So it's mainly the political will and commitment that is manifested in the policies that are gender responsive and legislation that are gender responsive, but also women being organized, women being groomed for leadership, and also ensuring that there are no discriminatory laws that hinder women's participation.
All right, now let's talk about gender responsive financing. You're aware that when it comes to investment or the advocacy for investment in women, or when you talk about the issue of empowerment, requires funds of financing. Talk to us, what are some of the challenges confronting implementing this gender responsive financing in Africa, and what are the solutions to these problems?
Yeah, in the first place, when we are talking about budgeting, many African countries, because of the lack of capacities, they just budget, they just get experts who just budget based on numbers and say, okay, in this sector, infrastructure, we need so many billions of francs or shillings or nairas, and they don't think about the people, and the people are not homogeneous. It's men and women. Even among men and women, you have rural people, rural women and urban women, and therefore the first thing is to build the capacity of the responsible institutions and governments to ensure that they are able to analyze their budgets using the gender lens. And of course, they need to be backed by statistics. Because, for example, if we are to come up with the health facilities without considering the concerns of women, you might just find a health center with no maternity leave, with no maternity facility, and yet women have to give birth, or maybe no space for children. And therefore, it is important that when one is planning, you have to take into consideration the gender responsive aspect. Same applies to agriculture. Yes, we know majority of women are in the agriculture sector, but of course, when it comes to giving out fertilizers and modern tools of farming, in most cases, it's the breadwinners who are men. So again, it's important that, for example, if you are planning training, you not only train men, you also train women, because at the end of the day, women are the ones who are so much involved in agriculture. So you need to have a gender lens, understand the context, understand the cultural setting, the status of women and men, and take all this into consideration in the budgeting. And of course, for implementation purposes, it's also important that parliaments play a key role, because it is the parliaments that pass budgets. And in some countries like Rwanda and even Uganda, before a ministry, they approve a budget of a ministry, you have to make sure that you have what we call gender budget compliance, showing that you are in the planning process, your budget is responsive to the needs of men and women. So it's a process, but we learn from day to day. And it's the only way we can ensure that there is equitable distribution of opportunities and resources for our people, men and women, boys and girls.
Regardless of the policies, the progress that have been made in policies that protect women's rights, because almost all countries in Africa have ratified the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, but yet we still have some of it happening. For instance, female genital mutilation and the right to inheritance, we still have these discriminations and these practices against women happening in African societies. What is the missing link? What is missing from the point where laws are made against these discriminations and practices against women and the point of implementation, upholding the law?
The biggest challenge we still have in most of African society is cultural practices that are still discriminatory to women. And therefore, and then, of course, these cultures that also explains why we still have patriarchy in our society. But sometimes even the religious beliefs, there is still a belief that in some societies, women have to go through female genital mutilation and other harmful practices such as early marriages, gender-based violence. And then, of course, most of these harmful practices are still take place in homes, in communities, and because of the cultural mindsets, sometimes even some women support it, the aunties, the older women, and therefore much as you can have the laws and the policies, the mindsets and the cultural thinking in these communities still have the way they perceive women and girls. And therefore, I think the missing link is to see how, one, we sensitize communities to abandon these harmful practices, sensitize them about human rights, that women's rights are fundamental human rights and they have to be respected. But also, governments have to enact laws that punish these harmful traditions, the practice of these harmful traditions. So the enforcement aspect of this law and also the policy is also very important, because in some countries you'll have very good policies and laws, but they are not implemented. So I think the call to action is to strengthen enforcement of the laws. In places where you don't have the relevant laws, enact laws and make them so stringent so that the perpetrators of, for example, rape against women or FGM have to think twice, because at the end of the day, they have to face the law.
Now let's talk about the issue of human rights for women. And when you talk about this subject, the greatest challenge has to be the issue of gender equality. But are those who argue, is it all about equality or equity? What's your take on this?
The word equality is equality in terms of opportunities, ensure that men, women, boys and girls, it is really a human rights issue, making sure that all human beings, irrespective of their gender, irrespective of their status, are treated equally. But the word equity is that process, because equality is the destination, whereas equity is to recognize that there are some categories of people. It could be, in this case, it will be women, because of the many years of historical marginalization, due to culture, due to structural inequalities. There need to be a level playing field, and that level playing field, so that they can be able to attain equality, is, for example, if you recognize that women do not have access to in property, or in terms of doing business, when it comes to tenders, it's mainly the men who get the big tenders. The first steps that you have to take is to ensure that you come up with affirmative actions, for example, to allow women to have access to credit, probably at a low interest rate, or sometimes because we know that many of them do not have collateral security, probably a government or other funding institutions could come up with a guarantee fund to help women have access to credit to a point where they are a level of now competing equally with other members of the society. So that will be an affirmative action, and it will be an equity approach so that you bridge the gender disparity. Same applies to education. You know that many girls up to now do not go for science subjects because of the socialization. You might have special programs, probably scholarship to promote girls, to attract girls for science and subjects. So probably some confidence building measures, make sure that in schools, probably girls who go for science subjects are rewarded from time to time so that you can have a critical mass of girls in science subjects. So those are some of the examples of equity solutions, to an extent that a time when you realize that there is no need for such affirmative action, you remove them. So that is the difference between equity and equality. And of course, they are all human rights concepts.
Let's talk about cooperation amongst women and mentorship, mentoring those who are already in leadership, mentoring young girls and even women in leadership, whether it's in business or in the political scene. Now, it is said that women don't like themselves, and that when you have a woman come out to run for a position, you don't find other women rally behind her. So how can cooperation amongst women be fostered in Africa?
Yes, yeah, that's a challenge, but maybe we also need to know that women are not homogeneous. They're also people who have interests, and sometimes they compete among themselves. But of course, we need to build solidarity among women so that they can be able to jointly fight for their cause as women. And that's why I think the issue of mentorship comes in, the issue of training, so that the issue of conscious reasoning, so that they understand their situation. They understand that women shouldn't be enemies of women, or even enemies of society, because at the end of the day, the issue of gender inequality is a societal, social construct, and it affects both men and women. And therefore, there is need for them to come together. So it's all about sensitization, it's about training, it's about conscious raising and mentorship, so that they understand they need to support each other, because sometimes you even have women in leadership who might even forget other women. So there is also need in terms of mentorship, but also making sure that you bring others up so that they can also join the ladder. So I think it's a call for women to work together to be able to address their challenges. So solidarity is critical.
All right, now let's make reference to you. You are a women, advocate, a politician, and also a lawmaker, and I learned you're serving second term now. I would like you to give us your personal account of the challenges women go through when it comes to this arena, which is very peculiar to men. So what are some of these challenges, and how have you been able to maneuver or manage these challenges, and what will be your advocacy for women who want to go into politics or run for public offices?
Yes, I think the biggest challenge may be coming from talking about myself. I started my journey a long time ago, and especially in 1994 after the genocide against us in Rwanda. And it was a time when the country was really in destruction. Every institution had been destroyed. We were starting from scratch, and the country needed educated men and women to support it. So, and that's how I started, one, joining the ministry in charge of gender, but also because I had passion for women, also working with women's civil society. And the challenge is always one, to have the confidence that you can do it.
Women really need to be inspired by people like you. We've been talking with Fatuma Ndagiza, Member of Parliament and the East African Legislative Assembly in Rwanda. She's joined us today virtually from Tanzania, where she is there doing some business for women and assignments as well, pushing forward for women's rights. We thank you so much for being a part of Early Exchange today. We'll find another time to bring you back on so we can look at other areas that concerns women empowerment in Africa.
Early Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.